We're excited. We, meaning you, we're both excited. All of us for this episode. You should be. Ivan Infante is joining me today. He is an immigration lawyer and an author of crime fiction, crime historical fiction. It just came out with his third novel, and we're going to talk about how he is using that to help his work doing immigration work and a lot of really cool things that he had to offer. This was a wealth of information in this discussion. So, hey guys, welcome back to The Broken Brain, by the way. It's me, Dwight. I wanted to also let you know there's a couple of specific bonuses that are attached to this episode for those of you that are patrons of the show, which you can become one by going to patreon.com/brokenbrain. And for those that are at least at the entry level of being the Brainiacs, as they're titled, to help support the show, there's 3 bonuses that are tied to this. First of all, just like every episode, whenever there is a video version of the interview, you do get that's already been sent out to patrons. You've gotten that in your email inbox. The link to the video of this interview, you get the whole thing before pre-edit and everything. So that's available. The other thing is that you'll notice that Ivan shares a couple of tips in this episode about avoiding burnout, being in a tough field as he is, and avoiding a burnout while being a helping professional, working with people, and some of the hard things that he has to see. I've left that all in here. That's not the bonus. You get to hear that just for freebies. But I did cut that into a small audio of that with a summation of the things that he says. And so you can get that as a downloadable MP3 or just stream it as you're a patron. That'll be coming out soon. Also, the third thing ties in with that, which is that he lists 4 skills that are going to be important for avoiding burnout. And those are actually going to be included as a high-quality PDF that is suitable for hanging up or making into a card or something like that. And you'll be able to see that as patrons as well. That'll be something that'll be sent to you for download and printing. And it's sized a certain way. The instructions will come with the email. So those are some things you can get from the Patreon. Really appreciate that. Those of you that are participating, that actually allows us to do more with the show. We do have upcoming in this year also the Broken Brain Book Club that we're going to be doing. I've heard back from some of you about that. And if you want to hit me up on Twitter or email at breakabrain, dwighthurst@gmail.com. Let me know if you're interested in that. We're getting that organized right now. So, Ivan, welcome to the show, man.
Nice to be here.
It's been a long time since you and I have chatted, other than just digitally. We're Twitter message friends pretty often, it seems like.
Yeah, I haven't been around, so I haven't been writing and putting books out. I've been busy doing my work, so I haven't been around.
Yeah, it was great to see the third Mike Chance novel finally drop. I'm such a big fan of the other 2. And it's Fake Bank, right? The name, of course. Yeah,
that is the name of the third one. The first one was False Ransom, and I put that out, maybe 7 years ago now. And there is a kind of a parallel with what I was doing in my personal life. At the time I wrote the first book, I was working. I had gone to law school, but I wasn't working as an attorney. Mm-hmm. I was doing bail bonds and sort of trying to figure out what to do. And while I was doing that, I was working at a bail bonds place at night. So I started writing to pass the time. And that's what I was doing when I wrote the first book. And then when I wrote the second book, I was already volunteering as an attorney doing immigration. And so the second book took a little bit longer because I had less time to, commit to it as I was kind of learning the profession. And then the third book took forever because I had started working full time and in the legal field. So the book sort of helped me transition from being a movie guy who wrote scripts to being an immigration attorney while still having a creative outlet, basically.
It's your whole career track is so fascinating to me, of having a foot in both worlds with the entertainment and media and fiction, and then also with the work that and you post about it on Twitter sometimes. I am always fascinated, and as I've said before, really glad that people are doing the work you're doing. All of the things you listed probably have like a high satisfaction rate, but for me, working in human services, one of the first things I hear too is a big potential burnout thing too. Like they're very hard work, and you get to see situations that aren't exactly like super happy all the time. And then with the entertainment and fiction writing and all that, sometimes also tricky, to get that going, as far as that goes, and can be frustrating probably too. So a high frustration and satisfaction ratio, I would think.
Yeah, well, I mean, my whole, my life is like a series of things that, I mean, the period of time between when I started writing the books and transitioned into the legal career is a pretty good microcosm of my whole life, because I graduated from law school very early in my early 20s. I was very highly touted graduate. I went right to work for Lloyd's of London, and I worked in Mexico City. I worked on NAFTA. This was back in the 90s. And at some point, I just got a random opportunity to come with a friend of mine to Los Angeles. And, I was 24, and I decided, I should take this chance, because if I'm, when I get to 54, I might regret it if I didn't roll these dice. Right. So I came out to California, and I worked pretty successfully in show business for 20 some years. And as I got older and I was looking for something more satisfying to do, I still had the legal career in my back pocket. But the second time I took a shot at my legal career, I wasn't so much interested in going to do work in Mexico City for Lloyd's of London. I was more concerned in, how I could give back. And this is where I kind of wanted to sort of bring up Twitter. One of the things that really I want to say more on Twitter when I interact with people, and that I don't, because, nobody wants to be lectured about things really. But the key, I think, to happiness is helping other people. And anytime I hear someone who is complaining about their circumstance or suffering, or they're lonely, or I just wish that they could realize what I realized when I started working in the immigration or the immigrant community, that if you're able to help people who are less fortunate than yourself, like that's the path to real growth. And it's funny, my best friend, or the guy that I've been friends with since second grade. So he and I have been friends for 50 years, I guess, or 40. Well, not 50, 40. Sorry. He came from a wealthy family like me, but his father died much younger, and he inherited all this money and blew it. And now he's embarked on this desire to sort of be a guru, right? Because he's really into meditation and yoga. But I have this, we're great friends. And I think that's why we can have these pretty intense discussions where I'm like, look at your programs. They talk about self, expressing your joy, feeling better about yourself, personal growth. And I'm like, I think that's kind of a dead end, man. I mean, you can sell people how to make themselves feel better all day long. But if you want to really improve yourself as a person, it's not about self, it's about the other. It's like what you can do for other people. And maybe he and I are going at the same thing differently. But we have that fundamental disagreement of what makes, effective personal growth.
It's really interesting, because when you talk about growth, and I've heard this philosophy before, where if you are making your focus doing for others, you're going to learn a lot of the same things that you might make as a goal, right? If it's like, oh, I want to be whatever, kinder, so I could think about kindness and I could focus on kindness, or I could go out and say, oh, well, who can I help? And I'll develop that. Or even some of the self-betterment things that are secondary soft skills, let's call them. Like, I want to be a better communicator. I want to be better at maybe sales, or giving a pitch to someone and helping convince someone to move in a certain direction for a good reason, let's say. But if you're going out there and helping people, and take what you do, you're negotiating and getting people to accept, probably clients understanding their situation, but also courts and judges granting things. I'm showing my depth of legal knowledge in the jargon that I'm using, but you develop that just naturally because of what you're doing. And I've always heard, like, if you make it about helping people, you're going to do better at developing as a person more than if you focus on developing as a person.
Well, yeah, life is super complicated, and things play out in a variety of different ways. But for me personally, I was at a career transition point. The books allowed me, in my mind, my chance and being able to write these books allowed me to maintain the creative outlet that I'd had for 20 years. And then I decided, well, I got to eat. And I met my future wife, and I know that she wanted me to be making, having a career going rather than just wondering if my pitches were going to sell. And they weren't selling because I was getting older, and that's a whole different radio show about ageism in show business. But,
sure.
You get to 40, you're not a superstar. You got a problem as a writer. Anyway, so I decided to get into immigration, and I started by volunteering, and that way I was helping people while learning something that would help me. And I think that's what you're saying, right? That if you want to grow in certain ways, you can find places to go where you can help people that also help you build the skills that you might need to go on to something else. Life is one of those journeys where I find that I'm very successful. I've only lost 2 cases out of several hundred. So the times that I've been doing this, I'm really successful. And the point of the conversation, the point of raising that in the conversation is the skills I learned as a creative person telling a story is what I can do for the judge. Is I make the person the star of their story, the client, the immigrant. And I try and cast the judge and the government attorney in the roles of the people that come through for the person, like in in one of those, Saved at the End movies where like everybody turns and rallies and saves the guy and makes his life better, And I think if you can tell a story where you can, instead of making the judge the arbiter of the rules or the prosecutor just interested in whether or not he can keep the person out of the country, invest them in the story, so that they can be like, oh, hey, honey, today I granted this case for this guy who XYZ, and the story plays really well. And that's been very effective for me. And one way also that in my journey, the storytelling has helped with the law.
Well, that's a fascinating way to look at it. I mean, I'm anyone who listens to the show knows I talk a lot about strengths-based decision-making, strengths-based treatment in mental health, more than focusing on the symptoms. I believe in focusing on the strength, right? And those kinds of things. And you're talking about bringing your own talents and strengths together and kind of in an out-of-the-box way, because would people say to themselves, I think being a good storyteller would help me as a lawyer? Well, actually, it makes a lot of sense. And maybe everybody out there is smarter than me and they already thought of that. But to say, I'm bringing in my creative fiction aspect to know how a story works. And of course, it's nonfiction, right? In the courtroom. But yeah, just saying like, here's how the parts of myself bleed together to make me better at what I'm doing, no matter what that is, in a way. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, I disagree with the people that work for the Department of Homeland Security and some of the immigration judges. I mean, we see things completely differently. And I don't know if I would be friends with them outside of court, right? But I know that they watch the same movies I do for the most part. I know they're in the culture. I know they understand the mythology, right? And if you can get them in that mindset where they can feel good about being a positive aspect of this person's life, this person's story that's in front of them, that can really help a lot. I mean, it doesn't work all the time. And sometimes you'll get the judge, but not the prosecutor. But I mean, I lay the groundwork for that before I even get into court. I mean, I'm emailing the prosecutors. You can't talk to the judge, but you can email the prosecutors and start like, hey, what would you think of this? Or how do you understand this? And trying to find out what their criticisms or hard parts are in the case. And you always kind of do that in the context of trying to convince them of their role in the story.
Gotcha. What they're going to do, you hope, or you hope for. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow. One of the things I think is super clever, I just mentioned this as we were setting up off air, that you're actually using and promoting the book as a way to help fund your work, your practice that you're doing, which I imagine, when people are listing the big money makers in law, right? They probably don't list immigration law at the top of that list. The high-powered type A, I'm going to get in there and make my millions at immigration law. I'm sure, right? Is it got to be an ongoing struggle to keep it going and fund the work that you're doing? And so the book ties in with that, where you're saying like, hey, I saw you make a tweet where you're like, if I sell this many copies, it's going to help this project or this part of my practice. And I think that's really clever. not only bringing your strengths together, you're bringing together your work to complement itself, to complement the work that you're doing on both sides, which I think is really cool. I don't know if you're getting feedback on that or just it's
No,
not
I
really a
think some of that
question. It's
is,
just me saying it's cool.
some of that is opportunism, right? Like some of it is like, I know people are invested and want to help me, and here's a way they can do so, and it's only going to cost them $4, right? And then that helps me push the book up, and I sell more. And if I were in a situation like I was before, where I was working at law firms, because what I normally do is I'll be contacted by a law firm, and they'll have a certain amount of cases that need to be tried over the next year and a half, and they'll hire me to do that. And I have, over the past years that I've been doing that, I've been really successful, and I have lots of opportunities to do it. But I found that a lot of those places, they're trying to maintain a lot of overhead. They're trying to pay a lot of people a lot of money that don't like going to court. And so they charge the immigrants quite a bit of money, and they don't necessarily give them the service that they deserve. They end up being kind of a number. They take the money, and then it doesn't matter whether they win or lose. And I don't like working that way. So I don't think I would have tried to raise money through the book if I were still in that arena. But a month or so ago, right about when I had, and coincidentally, that's when I had time to finish the book. A month or so ago, I decided that I was going to start my own office. And so I'm sort of, like you're saying, I'm sort of trying to promote on Twitter and on other social media outlets the idea that here's this new book that I wrote, and I'm starting my immigration office. So if you like me for my books and you like me for the immigration work, you can. And it's only $4. I mean, I don't really need to. If I really needed money, I suppose I would do a GoFundMe or a Patron or one of those things where it was like going to be my big thing. But this is just a way to sort of, I'll just, take advantage of people's willingness to help me and my clients.
It's a cool way
sell
to
some
do
books.
it.
Yeah, and if it gets more and more successful, and right now it's doing pretty well, but if it gets successful enough where I start getting word of mouth from people that aren't my direct, contacts, and it's because there seem to be more sales than people that I know, so that's good. But if it catches on in that sense, then yeah, it'll really give me the kind of cushion where I can not worry so much about money while I move forward with trying to sign some of my clients. And I'm already setting up, fee schedules that are less than the amounts that were charged for my services when I worked for other people.
Interesting.
So I think I should be able to provide a lower cost service because of the support of my community and the social media support that I get.
Yeah. I imagine with that, and that's phenomenal when you mentioned that you've been able to win almost all the cases that you've been able to work for. And boy, having a win, that must be, obviously, that's the good feeling. I mean, everybody, and when people approach like a field like this, where you're basically all about helping, they tend to, from outside the field, they tend to say things like, oh, it must be rewarding. And usually, yes, is the best answer because it is, right? But it takes a toll also to even see the inside of situations. It's not like by winning a case, you can say, yeah, everything's great for everybody now, because there's a lot of hard work that they're still faced with, and there's a lot of prejudice and just a lot of situations that they still have to face. But it's got to be a huge relief off their shoulders if they're able to stay in the U.S., which I guess I'm assuming, not seeing the inside of your industry, is a lot of the cases is basically their ability to stay, get a green card or not, or exportation. Is that mostly what you face?
That's actually called removal proceedings now. They stopped using the word deportation. I guess they thought that was too ugly. So I represent mostly people in removal proceedings.
It feels better to be removal proceeded than it does to be exported on the receiving end, I'm sure, too.
Yeah. I often wonder how depressing those airline flights must be when it's full of, because they charter jets and they put everybody on there that's being removed, and they all fly together back to their country. It's awful. So first of all, one of the sad things about the immigration system is that mostly people without attorneys lose. And even though I have a really high success rate, I think the average success rate for immigration attorneys is something like 86 or 88%, right? Because if you have the resources to get access to an attorney, you can win.
It's a
But most of
huge
them,
difference. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, most of them don't have access to an attorney. Most of them don't speak English. They have a hard time understanding what's going on, and they end up being removed pretty quickly. Um, and yeah, it's the best feeling in the world. I recently won a case for a guy that has been in court for a dozen years, trying to get his green card, and I got him his green card at the beginning of this year. And he had two young kids, one with autism, which was how I got him relief from removal, and now he stays here and will get his green card because his children are citizens. And boy, that guy was crying, man. And that was a great feeling, and to have that feeling consistently is really, really, really special. And when people lose, that's really awful. And sometimes you just can't win because of the circumstances. But I can't imagine any better feeling, really. Because if you think about it, like if somebody is going to be charged with murder and you're his defense attorney and you win and he's innocent, well, okay, if he was never guilty of murder, yeah, he's really happy, but he's more angry that he was ever on trial by mistake anyway. Like you didn't really do him any favors, right? You got him back to zero,
Yeah.
right? Whereas,
right.
Whereas with someone in these situations, I mean, I'm dealing with people who for 10, 15, 20 years have been in the shadows, unable to do a lot of different things, unable to get driver's licenses, unable to vote, and then when I win their case, they can get a social security card, they can get a green card, they can get social security benefits when they retire, they can get health insurance, it changes their lives for the better immediately. And that to me is really a great feeling.
Yeah. I wonder if you found any tips or tricks when it comes to not taking the work home or internalizing the negativity. A lot of our listeners work in human service related industries and things. I'm curious, what have you found that helps with that, or have you? It's an ongoing struggle, right? And maybe the wins compensate. I don't know. What do you find?
Yeah, the wins are definitely helpful. They get you through the dark times. Like everybody else, well, not like everybody else, but I think everyone in my situation should do what I do, which is that I have a therapist I talk to once a month, I guess, once every 2 months, maybe. And he and I have talked about that a lot, actually. And one of the things I try and do is create distinct spaces between my work and my home life. It actually helps if you have some sort of commute, because if you can create that separation between when you get in the car and start on your way home and what you do in the office, if you can create that separation, both physical and psychological, then it's a lot easier on your mental health. So I don't take work home. I stay to a set hour and then I leave. And I leave the work at home. Unfortunately, you get emails and stuff and you got to answer them. So it's not 100%, obviously. But I think what's helped me a lot is really focusing on the difference between work time and not work time, and making that transition between the two really, really clear. And maybe that wouldn't help all people, or everyone, but it helps me to have a routine, right? So in the morning, I listen to a very specific radio show as I drive to work, Democracy Now! With Amy Goodman. And I know as I'm listening to that show, I'm hearing the news and I'm getting ready for work. And then when I leave work at 6 o'clock or 6:30 or whenever, because I work basically from 8 to 6:30, I put on some loud music or some comedy or something that I know will not remind me of my work. I turn it up a little bit loud maybe, and I drive home, and I actively, I practice active present moment living, so I actively don't let my mind go back to work.
It's one
and
of
that helps. Then I get home, I get home, I walk the dogs, I take a shower, and I do the same thing. And when I get out of that shower, man, I am not working.
It's interesting as you say that demarcation of I'm home, the home arrival time, and sometimes it is the drive home. I knew someone years ago who worked in a very manufacturing industry, so there was a lot of it was normal to take a shower anyway and change out of a uniform jumpsuit kind of thing, but he started making that a routine, just like what you're saying, almost a ritual of come in, say a quick hi to the family, get into the shower, have that kind of a thing, and then say, I've now arrived. I'm really home now, right? Kind of a thing. So that's interesting as you put that and bring that up.
Yeah, it reminds me of insomnia, because one of the things they tell you about insomnia is not to do stuff in your bedroom. Like your bedroom is specifically for sleeping, right? You keep it dark. You go in there when it's time to sleep. You don't watch TV in there. You don't read in there. You have other places in your house for that. And I look at work that way.
Yeah. Yeah, awesome. The present focused thinking and the mindfulness it's interesting how that comes up. Even a lot of guests I have who maybe have different philosophies and approaches to life or to what they think helps, blah blah blah. That comes up almost universally is the benefits of the focusing on the present and not allowing past and future to invade the moment as much as possible. Like you say, I mean, same thing with business emails. You can't do things, and that flexibility I think is important to say. I can't do it perfectly. I don't have to do it perfectly, but I can try to say, even answering that email, am I doing that purposefully right now in the moment, saying, I'm going to go sit here and I'm not going to pretend that I'm not doing it. I'm just going to do it. Then I'm going to finish and I'm back. I'm back home now. And, that kind of doing it purposefully in the moment, even if it's not, exactly what I usually would want.
Yeah, I think it comes up over and over again where you can't expect other people to play by your rules, right? So you have a partner who's going to email you at 10 o'clock at night and expect you to respond. Well, you can be mad about that, or you can just, like you said, you can handle it and then go back to how you were before. See, my dad was has been always a very positive person. He's still with me. He was basically in exile from Spain when the dictatorship was there, and he came to the United States, and he lost a lot of stuff due to the politics. And he has this saying in Spanish, siempre adelante, nunca para atrás, which is always forward, never back. And he has always been someone who is, stay positive, look on the bright side. And one thing he always used to say is, well, let's make the best of it, and I mean, how else you could live in another space if you wanted to, but why? And once you realize that with a little bit of mindfulness, you can choose the state of mind you're in, or at least, more often than not choose it, then yeah, you can have a much more positive life.
Huh. That's powerful. That's a powerful thing. So I wanted to ask now to switch into talking about the Mike Chance and the world of the novels that you've written. This is a trilogy with the same character, who I found to be a very fun character to read. It wouldn't be a very fun character to run into, IRL, or if he was real. as I'll let you describe him, but
well, he's an extremely violent con man with a never clearly stated mental health issue, probably brain damage of some kind. So he has a very short fuse. And I think, like I was discussing at the beginning, when I was first starting out on those books, I was in a transitionary phase between what I had been doing in entertainment and not being as successful as I'd liked, to shifting into this legal career where I've actually done okay. And so I was a little bit bitter about not having had that success. And so the characters are very angry and does a lot of violent things. And I think people, after listening to this, if they went and read it, they'd be a little bit surprised that I'm the guy that wrote it, because it's so violent. But a lot of it is really about my anger at how people don't quite seem to ever get it. And the one thing that the characters in my book who are con men, they make a lot of mistakes. They're not the brightest people in the world, but they understand the facade. They understand the structure isn't real. And they understand that regular people are more independent than they let themselves be, And just like when I'm on Twitter and I hear people not whining, but complaining about their lives and their, oh, woe is me this and woe is me that. I'm like, you don't have to be in that state of mind, and like we said at the very beginning of the show, the first way out is helping other people, but the book is more the side of me that is really angry that people don't understand that they're free, that they lock themselves in patterns and they lock themselves in negative relationships because they don't understand that they're free. You got a crappy job, you can walk away. You might think you can't, but you can. Same with a crappy relationship, you can leave. I had a psychologist way back in the day when I was really young who was like, some people aren't friends with their parents, like, yeah, it's true. If your parents are really terrible, you don't got to hang out with your parents. I mean, we can always move on, we can always look forward, and make the best of what happens. And you don't have to be trapped.
Is that why you see, so you identify more with the crime fiction, because here's someone who's certainly, and not just him, but he's got remind me his side.
Well, he has Benny and he has Doc.
Is Benny in this one?
Yes, Benny is all the way until the end. I don't know if I'm going to write book number 4, but I might. But this one ends pretty well if I wanted to wrap up the trilogy. But Benny's the same way. Benny's a guy. He's Jewish. He's not really accepted in 1930s Los Angeles like he'd want to be, and he refuses to take that, and he lives his own way, and he's made himself successful, and he doesn't, play by these rules that he doesn't like. And, of course, it's a metaphor. I would never tell people, hey, man, if you're broke, go rob a bank, dude, hey, live your life. I'm talking more metaphorically, about people who don't necessarily know that they can leave bad relationships and bad jobs,
Yeah. Yeah, it is interesting to see past those boundaries you're talking about and say it's empowerment is really what you're talking about, I think.
Yeah, I think it's empowering, but it's also, it's kind of complicated to say this, but there's like what's the word I'm looking for? There's like a constellation of needs that we think we need, but we don't, I mean, there's the old saying, what do you need or what do you want, and the things that you need are actually quite few. And I think more people get caught up in what they need than what they want. And if they would just go after what they want, they'd realize that there's a lot less stuff they need.
That's hard. Yeah. I mean, it's a hard thing. I know, thinking of also being in private freelance kind of practice like you are, in my own world, there's a lot of times where you are chasing things for survival and to trying to rub a couple nickels together or whatever and say, I got to chase down the insurance reimbursement, or I got to, think about keeping the lights on because it is there. Obviously you have to. And I think, you get the mentality, and it kind of goes under that empowerment umbrella to say, just chase your dream and everything else will fall into place automatically. And it's like, well, you do have to work it a little, right? You do have to try to make it happen. And so it's easy to slip, at least for someone like me, really easy to slip into just kind of, all right, I'm doing drudgery. And it's like, well, I'm actually in this thing that I've worked really hard to get into, right? I'm actually at a point where it's like, this is the career that I have. And why am I not valuing it more if I'm then I have to evaluate why I'm doing it that day or that week or that month?
Yeah. I mean, I think, nothing's perfect. There's definitely days where I wish things had, gone differently and I wasn't doing this and I was still writing scripts and, living large. But I mean, you have to take responsibility for your happiness, right? So chasing down those insurance things and doing all that. I mean, if you're speaking to at an extreme point where that is really a hassle, then maybe you shouldn't be doing it, but at the same time, like I think you're suggesting, everything is not the ideal. We have to eat. I can't not work. I need people to buy this book. I need to have some cases come in.
They can pay,
and
right?
Yeah, so that I could eat food. All of that is true, but I've often found that worry is not the solution to those issues. No. Activity is, working, doing things,
Yeah.
And
what?
Yeah, sometimes it's hard, but you got to.
Yeah. One of the things that I really enjoy, as you mentioned, your novels are set in the 1930s in Los Angeles, which is a time and a place where I think there's a lot of fascination and focus of that history. I also, anybody who's not, I don't know that this will be a huge bump or not, but if anyone's not following you on Twitter, you also like to tweet old photos from that era, which I always like so that I can go back and see them again. But, there's that fascinating era. And one of the things that you've included, in addition to it being really good crime fiction and having the action and the cons and all that, the cons that you include are real things that I didn't know people did, like offshore casino kind of things. I didn't know all about that. That's in your second book, right?
Yeah, that's all real.
Yeah.
That really happened. And in fact, I think one of the guys that ended up being the Supreme Court, I think it was Brennan, was involved when he was Attorney General of California trying to shut that down. It's one of his claims to fame. Yeah.
Yeah. They'd set up a just slightly offshore kind of thing or launch. Did they even launch the ship, or was it just kind of sitting there a lot of times having the casino go
Yeah. So the original lawsuit that came out of it was what constitutes offshore, right? So if it was 7 miles from the coast of Santa Monica, or 7 miles, I think, they were still in Santa Monica Bay and they could anchor out there and it would be really easygoing and people could come out and gamble. But Brennan and the authorities were like, no. 7 miles offshore is 7 miles outside of Santa Monica Bay. So then you're out in open ocean, doesn't work anymore. So there's actually a lot of litigation about what constitutes 7 miles offshore, right? And so by the late 30s, they had shut them all down. I think by 1939, 1940, and the war started. So, people were not into that kind of leisure activity at the time. But in the mid 30s, before they established where the offshore was, they were just out in Santa Monica Bay. You can see old placards where like ads for like a quarter of a night of dancing and gambling. And you would go down to Santa Monica Pier and they would take you out to you would all be dressed in your tuxedos and they'd float you out to the gambling boat and you'd gamble out there and come back, Wow. It was popular. There were multiple. There were 3 or 4.
What's the con and fake bank? Whatever. And you don't have to spoil or anything if,
Oh, no. The fun thing about the books is the cons are always incidental. The first one, they fake a kidnapping, but it doesn't really have much to do about the kidnapping. And the second one, they're involved in fixing a boxing match. I mean, the title of the book is Fixed Fight, so you pretty much know what's going on with that. But it's not really about the intricacies of that, although I get into that. But that's not really, everybody knows the direction it's going. And so Fake Bank is based on cons that happened around the beginning of the Great Depression, where con men in crews of, 10 or 12 would hear about a bank closure in a town. It would go in and bribe some people in the town to let them move into the bank, set up a bank that ostensibly was a real bank. And then they would take deposits and and handle a few payrolls for 6 weeks or 8 weeks and then disappear with all the money.
Wow.
And that would happen. That happened quite a bit until I think, the FBI and all that stuff in World War II, and it all went away. But there was a period in the Depression, maybe the late 20s, mid 30s, where there were several crews that did that sort of operation.
Wow. It's pretty.
Yeah, because it was easier back then, people didn't necessarily know, and you could forge the certifications. And as long as the mayor or somebody in the town was willing to say you were for real, no one was going to say you weren't, The
same person who would then be incredulous and say, "Oh, I can't believe they did that."
Yeah, exactly. But he would have gotten paid, of course.
Sure. Wow, you really soak a town. That'd be a horrible kind of thing to have come through.
Yeah. It's not the standard short con. I mean, it's a pretty aggressive long con. And I think what they were mostly trying to do is get people to trust them to process their payrolls, so that someone would bring. Yeah. So that they would end up with the payrolls at the end of the month, and then they would shut down and leave town.
And I don't even know if insurance was a thing FDIC insurance was a thing back then.
But that was just starting out. I mean, The Depression is what gave rise to all that stuff. And so I think part of it was these kind of guys, because, that's the point, is you're talking about an era where banks were collapsing anyway. Mm-hmm. So there were probably a lot of legitimate banks that were doing pretty much the same thing as these guys, except, they had the patina of respectability.
Oh, wow. That's an interesting component too. And I wonder if, does that, maybe I'm reaching, but is that influenced by the experience that you've had in this working in the system, where the system definitely favors people and does things that if you, as a private person, if you forced someone to disrupt their whole life, and you'd be prosecuted for it, right? I mean, it would be terrible to do to someone versus but it's okay as long as it's under the guise of the law. We can take advantage of your situation and your lack of resources.
Yeah, it's funny because I'm of mixed minds. You meet a lot of people who are really, I had a guy that I was friends with, or I'm still friends with him, who, he likes to, he works hard at his job 5 days a week, and on the weekend he goes home and he smokes his pot and he watches his sports and he buys his stuff on Amazon. And whenever I would hang out with him, he would smoke his weed and he would start getting paranoid about how the government was doing this and doing that. And I said, dude, you're the perfect citizen. You work 40 hours, you pay your taxes, you go home on Friday, you don't leave your house, you buy stuff off Amazon, you watch their television shows. Like, nobody's coming after you, you know. But I'm of two minds about it because working against the government and litigating the government in court, against the government in court, I mean, they know so much about each and every one of us as it is. And if they, for whatever reason, decide that you're a problem, they can destroy you, even if you have a good attorney. Or even if you haven't really done anything. And there's such that while I'm sure it's much worse in a lot of other less democratic countries, there's still, bureaucracy and petty bureaucrats and people who take pride in making things more difficult. And one of the things I found during the Trump administration is in the immigration context specifically was that, it wasn't so much that they were changing a lot of the case law and changing a lot of this and that, which they did get around to doing. But the first thing they did was they just abandoned all the quid pro quos, the common sort of deals and rules of the game that we all played by that were sort of unspoken. Like you could contact someone about this, or they wouldn't ask about this specific thing because you just was off the table, and everything was abandoned immediately. And it didn't require the law to change or anything. It just had people with ill will within the government bureaucracy who know that now they can get away with things, because it's not what the law is, it's how they interpret it. And so suddenly they can decide that X is Y. And it takes a long time to recover from that. You can litigate against that and you can go to court, and it might take 5, 6, 7 years before you get it sorted out.
Yeah. Then the burden is always on a person to go. I mean, I know we say, innocent until proven guilty or whatever. I know it's more criminal law, but but you still are, as the citizen, are the one who has to initiate. I got to go get somebody, pay somebody, help get a lawyer to help me, whatever it is to change anything or fight anything. Yeah, be intimidating.
Yeah, and often you don't know how the government works. So like they'll send you this really angry letter, right? And you might get that as a citizen and be like, oh my God, I'm in huge trouble. But as an attorney, I see that and go like, oh, well, this is just the first letter they send you. This is probably sent out automatically or sent out by some guy. And you really just have to respond and find somebody that knows what's going on. And eventually you can probably solve this without too much trouble. But people don't know that, and they panic. And rightly so, because it can be really scary.
Yeah. I wanted to ask, we did an interview about your books a long time ago, and it's really stuck. One thing that stuck with me ever since then is your writing style of when you are in the mode and you're telling the story. Can you talk a little bit about that, how you approach that creativity and drive the story? I found it was really interesting.
So when I was transitioning from writing screenplays, because screenplays, you're visualizing the movie and, it's more about structure and building a framework. And with novels, it's a little bit different. And I was not sure how I was going to approach writing the novel with an outline or note cards or what I was going to do. And then one day I was reading, so there's a book by one of the Parker novels, by Donald Westlake, writing as I can't remember the name he wrote under.
Richard, was it Richard Stark or Robert Stark?
Yeah, as Richard Stark, right?
Yeah. I almost said Robert Stack, but that was the host of Unsolved Mysteries.
No, I've been in his house though, nice house.
Oh.
Yeah, I had to go up there once when I was in show business. It was amazing. I'll never forget. Actually, it was one of the more amazing houses I've ever been in. Just as an aside, because he came from a lot of money. He wasn't just an actor. He was somehow family money. And boy, it's like it's this Hawaiian theme, and they're all this black lava everywhere, and there are all these little glass sort of cabins connected by covered walkways. So it's like indoor, outdoor, rolling down this hill. Dude, it's unbelievable. You know,
I'm
I'm
picturing
sorry to
him.
take on the aside, but you mentioned Robert Stagg, and the house was
That's interesting.
unbelievable.
Now I'm picturing him giving a tour, being like, the story behind this lava rock. No, I'm just kidding. But in my mind, he's just always the I know he did other things, but he's always the host to Unsolved Mysteries in my head.
Yeah.
Anyway.
So the guy, I think his name is Lawrence Block, and he wrote the preface to this book, and he talks a lot about his system. And so when I was trying to figure out how I was going to write, and I read that, I said, well, this works for me. And it's called the narrative.
Yours are very similar to Parker storylines too, actually.
Yeah. So I read a lot of the Parker books. Mine is sort of a combination of two things I really loved when I was reading these kind of books, which was The Big Sleep / The Maltese Falcon, those two writers, and Parker. So I tried to bring Parker into the world of the Maltese Falcon and the Big Sleep. That's basically what I tried to do. And I liked all those writing styles, but as far as my approach, so they do the narrative push method, which is basically you decide on who your character is and what he's like, and then you just let him run, and you just write and write and write and sort it out at the end. Don't look back until you get to the end. And that was liberating for me, because one of the problems I'd had was, you write 10 pages and then you go back to page 1 the next day, and you get caught up in how terrible those first 10 pages are, and you never get anywhere, Yeah. But if you don't necessarily look back, so the first draft, I never look back. I'll go straight from the beginning to the end. I don't even think about it. I don't care if it makes sense. I just go, and eventually you find your character at the end of the story. I think it helps that I have those con games as sort of a framework. Like, I know they have to do the fake bank con. I know they have to do the fixed fight. I know they had to do the phony kidnapping in all 3 of those books. So I knew that these things had to have a beginning, a middle, and the end, right? But I was more focused on the character and him going through those things.
And you don't necessarily plan out this, then this, then this. And do you have a vague idea at all of the ending before, or is it just kind of like you feel like, I'm done. This is it. This is a good wrap up at this point, and I think I can call it.
Well, no, I have an idea at some point after the first draft of how it's going to end, and you never know when that's going to like pop into your head. Like with this last book, I knew the ending almost at the very beginning, because I knew exactly how I wanted this one to end. The second one, I knew that they were going to have to go to the third one, right? Because I wrote these books knowing there would be 3 of them. So I knew the second one had to end with them leaving Los Angeles. But other than that, I had no idea how that was going to happen. And as for the first one, I knew it was going to end when the kidnapped victim escaped, but I had no idea how they were going to escape or what that was going to entail. But other than that, those general notions of what the end was going to be, I didn't worry about that the first draft. I just wrote. And so when I got it all down, say it's 200 pages, because they usually get to be about 200. And then when I release them, they're 150 because I take stuff out. Then I start a system where I do 10 pages and then back 5 and forward 10 and back 5 and forward 10. And that's how I do all the drafts after the first one.
That's cool. And is that a way to keep yourself moving forward? Because instead of getting
constantly moving forward, yeah. But also, you want to have a smoother transition, so you go back and then you go forward again through those 5 pages. So you're rewriting them a little bit and cleaning them up a little bit, but it also helps, in my opinion, or for my writing, it makes me feel as if the writing is going to flow better and be less abrupt, because you're never starting at a 0. You're always going back and going forward again, as far as the second and third drafts.
Awesome.
And then at the very end, I give it to my mom, who skips the really violent parts, but checks it for typos. And I know there's a few typos in the books every time, but I mean, she's 85, people, so got to give her a break.
Well, she's not reading those really violent parts, so
she's skipping those parts. So
someone gets shot in the here instead of the head, then you know that you know why.
That's on her.
And that's why I enjoy the pacing of that too, where sometimes some of these things can feel a little by the numbers, where it's like, oh, let me just reinvent Parker or something with some of this type of fiction. And I find my personal experience with yours is that it's like, oh, wait, no, I didn't expect that. It's like, wait, we were going in a direction, and here's this. I won't spoil, but in one of the two, there was a particular death that I was like, well, that was a key person, and then they're dead. And it's like, and then it puts the characters into this. What the hell do we do now? And which is, it's like I wasn't expecting that particular what do we do now problem solving, and so it becomes. Yeah, and I think it becomes something that's like you have this feel of like, oh, I'm going through this adventure, and of course, a con or a heist goes bad probably a lot of the time, and bad things happen. It's like, and why shouldn't it? It kind of should, right? I mean, it should be
Yes,
something.
and my characters are particularly incompetent, as you know. I mean, they're not exactly the smartest.
It's not Oceans. They're not Oceans 11.
No, it's not Oceans 11. It's like Oceans 6.5 or something. There's some stuff missing. But that's a good example, because I think what you probably experienced was a moment where I came in the story doing the narrative push method, right? Didn't know necessarily what was going to happen. So I said, well, what if this guy dies? How would my character react to that? And it worked, so I kept it in there. But I think that it's great that you bring that up, because that's a really good example. I was probably writing along. I was probably feeling stuck, right? So I just had that happen and had the character adapt to it. And when, that was the second draft probably, or the first draft. And so when I went back to look at it later, I was like, well, that actually works. I like the way that works. And I kept it in. And sometimes it doesn't work. But that's a really good example of the narrative push method. Okay, this happens. Now the character's got to react to it, and that will push the narrative forward. And we'll see where it takes me.
It reminds, I just stuck in my head there of, there's a recent movie, the newest David Copperfield. That's a very different genre than what we're talking about.
I don't think I've seen the newest one.
It's Dev Patel is in it.
Oh, yeah. It's not so bad.
It's good. I liked it a lot.
Yeah. My wife loved it. I was watching her watch it, basically. I didn't watch it.
One of the one of the bits I always mention with it is they embraced the diverse casting, and they didn't ever apologize or say anything about it, like, "Oh, you're adopted." It was just, "No, this person is of Indian descent. This person's black. It doesn't matter. They're just in there." And I've always thought that's cool. But the thing that it reminds me of, the story is told in a narrative format. Is David Copperfield's a writer, and he's writing, and there's a pivotal scene where he has this love interest who he doesn't end up with. That's the kind of wrong for him, but he wants to make it work. Whatever, it doesn't matter. But so there's this scene where all of a sudden she's there, and she's being kind of a real silly reaction to this really serious situation, and then she stops in the middle of this scene and she goes like, "Why am I here? It doesn't make sense that I'm here." And then it cuts to him writing, and he's like, "Well, I know you weren't really there, but I want to put you in it, And it's like, and I just was thinking that, because it's like, I imagine there's those times where you're like, "Oh, it doesn't work for this guy to die. Well, now he's there. What do I do now? That probably shakes the story."
Yeah, you got to do something.
So that's got to be a tricky bit of it. But maybe, I don't know. Do you enjoy that part? Is it fun to go back through and have to adjust? Or is that a pain?
Yeah, I think, no, that's way easier. I mean, I think the first draft is really hard, and the editing is often much more rewarding, because then you see the good things in there and you can build on those, and the hard part is over, because then you kind of at least have the ending by then for sure, and so you can just write to the ending. And I love the editing part. A lot, actually, and I think maybe I even over edit sometimes. Mm-hmm. But I really only have a hard time getting the first draft down, and that's why I have a lot of systems. I mean, to be honest, I have ADHD, so for me, concentrating and focusing for a long period of time on something like this is a little bit harder. And I just have systems where I get a certain amount of pages down every day, and I focus on doing those. And, I really can focus well once I have a system set up that helps me focus, But the first draft, when there's nothing there and I have to create it out of nothing, it's hard to keep my mind on what I'm doing, more so than when I'm editing.
Excellent. Wow, it's fascinating to see the strengths and the things that you've worked through with both these huge parts of our discussion today, but huge parts of your life, of this service for others, and the creativity and the outlet there that you're putting out. I always ask people when they're on the show if there is a certain charity or anything that they would recommend that people should give to out there, either community involvement or particular charity. And then, of course, I want to give you a chance to tell people where they can find you and your book and your work. But do you have anything that comes to mind of a charity or nonprofit?
Yeah,
that
so
you feel
I
strongly?
occasionally work with, there's two. There's Esperanza Immigration Rights Project, ESPERANZA, Esperanza. It's open Spanish. And there's a group called KIND, which is Children in Need of Defense, which represents undocumented children, minors, 13, 14-year-olds. So Children in Need of Defense, or KIND, KIND, that's the initials, or the Esperanza Immigrant Rights Project. Those are two really good groups that I work with and that I'm in court with a lot. Esperanza represents a wide variety of people, and it's focused mostly in Los Angeles in the Central American community, I believe. And KIND takes all cases, and it's children. So if you're interested in helping some of the kids you hear about coming here from Central America, then KIND would be the way to go. They do a lot of great work.
It's shocking a lot of times how you see, especially how it affects kids. Not just there's a separation from their parents, but then I remember seeing some expose thing that was going on one of the news programs where the reporters located it was a whole floor or two of a hotel that had been transformed into housing for kids, and they tried to even go in the hotel and just ask a few questions. They couldn't figure out if these were federal employees or not, and I guess you could say self-predicting they're going to get kicked out, but just the demeanor of the people who were there with the kids was alarming, I guess you could say. And I'm not, whatever. I'm not attacking it. There are people out there who their job is to care for the kids that are in those situations, and I'm sure there's some that take pride in trying to give the kids as good an experience as they can or as safe as they can. So I'm not attacking anybody.
Yeah, I mean, they do.
It's a bad situation.
There are some things that are unavoidable. I mean, you can be critical about a wide variety of the system, but if a 13-year-old shows up here by himself, you got to put him somewhere. And so usually the kids that I represent will have been with the refugee resettlement organization, which is, I think, part of Department of Health, maybe. And they'll have been put into the custody of distant relatives, usually. And then those relatives will hire me or KIND to represent those kids. And so I've had a bunch of kids that, they're 12, 13, they've walked here from Guatemala, so wow. The look of it, they look like old men. They're like these little guys, little bodies, but their faces, they look like they're 35, And a lot of them are really just normal kids, but they've been incredibly traumatized. And, you can be critical of kids in cages and everything, but, to understand the complexity of the issue, I mean, what are you going to do with those kids when they show up? You got to put them somewhere, And I think that, putting them in jails is horrible and they shouldn't do that. But they have to go somewhere until they can be taken in by a charity or by a relative.
Yeah.
So, I think we should make that process as easy as we can for the kids. It's not a simple situation. I think I have different views on it because I represent a lot of people who've been here for a long time and whose families are here. And I see no reason why they shouldn't stay. I think the laws that want them to leave are racist. At the same time, we can't let everybody here. I mean, you're just physically impossible. So I think we could let most of them in, but sometimes you can't let everybody in. So you have to, I think we should be more open than we are by a lot, but you understand that there can't be no borders.
It's, and it's not like you hear people talking about, when they're talking about the concern of immigration, they're not usually talking about Europeans that are living here without documentation. I mean, they're not.
Because there are a lot of those.
Usually, and there are a
lot of Canadians too.
Yeah.
A lot of Canadians.
Yeah.
And then finally, I think, there's some people that you don't want here. I mean, I represent people who are being removed after being arrested for assault with a deadly weapon or, their third DUI. And, as an attorney, I feel like I don't mind taking their money in order to give a good defense and present their side of the story and make sure that the government crosses the T's and dots the I's and respects the person's right to due process and the other limited constitutional protections that they have in immigration court. But at the end of the day, when they remove the guy with 5 DUIs, I mean, I mean, I'm not upset. And even the guy with the 5 DUIs, you talk to them, and they know they're going home. They have no illusions. The vast majority of the people that come here to get the work permit. They want to work. They want to send money home to their families because most of them are extremely poor. And I think that if we just let them in and let them work, a lot of them wouldn't even stay.
Yeah. Huh.
Yeah.
Wading into that nuance is very tricky, and the fact that you're opting into it career-wise is, I think, a very admirable thing. As you know, that I feel that way. But
thanks so much, man.
Where can people find you and follow you? And obviously, the book. Is there a place that's better to buy it than other places?
So I know people don't.
They get it at.
No, I know some people don't like Amazon, and I am sort of in agreement. But since I wrote the first 2 books on there, I wrote the 3rd one on there, and because I have an exclusive deal with Amazon, I get 70% or 75% of every sale. So the books are $4. So for every book, I get like $2.75. So that works for me. So the only place to buy them is on Amazon. You can look me up on Amazon as E for Ernesto, Ivan Infante. So E.Ivan Infante. And then if you look up False Ransom, which is the easiest one because there's not a whole lot of other things that use that title. Then you'll find the first one and you'll find the Mike Chance series, and you can buy all of them. The most recent one is called Fake Bank, because they make a bank that's fake, obviously. And I really hope people will buy it because, as you mentioned, all the money is going to the office that I'm setting up so that I can take more cases and represent more people in immigration proceedings on my own terms and do as much good as I can without having to charge as much as possible. I'm very active on Twitter. My account is currently unlocked, and I love it when people follow me. I am at Eddie Mars Attack, which I think if you type in, you can find pretty easily. I think if you type in Ivan Infante, you can find me on Twitter as well. But I do a lot of tweeting. You get a lot of old photos, you get a lot of immigration, and you get a lot of movie stuff and Mike Chance stuff. And old pictures, that people love those.
Checks all my boxes. I like it. Yeah, that's why I follow you. And I'll at you when I promote this on Twitter as well, so people can also go to.
Thank you so much, man. Thank you.
When people go to @BrokenBrain, you can also find it there and click and follow. Once again, maybe even better content at Ivan's Twitter. But you can see that as well there. And of course, once again.
I must say, they're really good books, and I worked really hard on them, and I never tried to get them published. So it's not like I was rejected by any publishers. I put them out myself because I'm primarily an immigration attorney, but they have really high reviews and people really like them. And if you like crime, if you like the 30s, if you like historical fiction, I'm very respectful of the language and very respectful of the setting. Everything is historically accurate. It would really help me out if you would buy them and really help out the practice. So Thank you for having me on, and I really, really appreciate it.
Yeah, I appreciate your time so much. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Court and Parts Podcast Network. To listen to more Court and Parts shows, visit courtandarts.com.